Fire, what you saying?
Yes, I give thanks to life every time, you know?
Serious thing. Today we have a special show with a special guest, author of The Rise of Rastafari Resistance, Redemption, and Reparations, Makonnen Sankofa. Fire, what you saying?
Yes, greetings. Good to be on the podcast, and I never knew TV. I'm a big fan of your work. So I just wanted to say that the book is actually called The Rise of Rastafari, Resistance, Redemption, and Repatriation.
All right, cool then. Fire, we want to go right into the thing. And the first question I have to ask for you is, right, based on your research, you have a chapter here that speaks about the death or the disappearance, some would say, of Selassie, right? And what information have you uncovered about that?
So the death surrounding Haile Selassie comes from different sources. In my book, The Rise of Rastafari, I mentioned that it's mysterious because I've heard family members of Haile Selassie through doing my research that have said that he has passed away, and that he was buried, obviously, during the coup that happened when Mengistu Haile Mariam basically overthrew Haile Selassie, and Haile Selassie was held in the imperial palace. And then later on, Haile Selassie, it was believed in that he departed and the news came out that Haile Selassie passed away. But from family members of Haile Selassie, I have heard, I think it's one of his grandsons that said that he passed away. And there was another show that I watched where it said that confirmed that Haile Selassie had passed away. I've heard in my book, though, I have heard, like I mentioned, of an elder Rasta and some other Rastas that claim that Haile Selassie has made a mystical disappearance. And then there's also the Indian guru. I think is correct me if I'm wrong the pronunciation, but he's called Master, I think, Sedanath. I can't really pronounce his name, but he's written a book called, I think it's Wings of Freedom or something along those lines. And he mentions meeting Haile Selassie after it was believed that he passed away. So what I've said in the book is the information is kind of inconclusive because I've heard from other sides about the passing of his death and when he was buried. So, however, that doesn't take away the contributions and everything that Haile Selassie has done. So I think I actually put that in my book in the way that I've written it. I said, regardless of, the mysteriousness of the death or whether he's alive or how he died, etc. But we have to acknowledge the works that he's done whilst he was here and whilst he was alive, whilst he was here.
You know, and I think that is an important part of the whole Rastafari movement, because you see, a lot of people get caught up in the Christian concept of what their God represents, that this portion of it is what they spend a lot of time on. So it's very crucial that you actually mention this part of it, and then also that you dispel that this does not take away from the works of Haile Selassie too, you know?
Yeah, man.
Yeah, because I noticed that with all heroes, there's a thing where, and we spoke about it before, where it's definitely a savior complex where they're looking for this perfect being to be without fault, and we tend to, as fault finders, especially as people are African descent, we have this fault finder trait that we like to use. We focus on people's shortcomings and we don't focus on the works. And speaking of that, please let the people some of the great things Selassie has done, both for Ethiopia and the African continent.
Yeah, so first I just want to say that like the uniqueness about this book, because you kind of touched on to it, is that it's from more of an African-centric perspective rather than like the biblical, as a brethren just mentioned, for example. Sometimes I think with Rastafari, we get caught up, a lot of Rastas get caught up too much in the biblical ideology. And without going too in depth into that, because I want to keep on point of what you said, but that's certainly what makes my book unique in terms of how it's more from an Afrocentric perspective. And it actually draws reasoning, for example, how Rastafari stands on its own without the Bible. Now, going into your question about it's the works of His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, we're talking about organizing a crucial role in setting up the Organization of African Unity with Kwame Nkrumah, the headquarters being in Addis Ababa. He played a key role in establishing Ethiopia's first airlines. He turned his own palace, one of his palaces, into a university, something that a lot of people don't know, but during the time Nelson Mandela, during apartheid, Nelson Mandela actually went to Ethiopia, and it's Haile Selassie's military that actually trained Nelson Mandela. Haile Selassie, he issued him with a passport to get back in South Africa and a handgun with the intent to take out the apartheid regime. This was after Nelson Mandela told him what was going on in Ethiopia. He really played a pivotal role in modernizing his country in terms of like developing several hundreds of schools during the time that Haile Selassie was in power. Schools, he used to pay for some people's hospital. He used to give money to some of the students that were in school, which allowed them to get equipment. And a lot of, say, the modernization, like the roadwork and infrastructure, a lot of that is down to Haile Selassie. And he's got an impact not just in Ethiopia. He's one of the most traveled kings, emperors, not just black in history. I mean, if you look at the amount of different, not just on the continent, in Europe, in Asia, the places that His Majesty traveled to is significant. And during that kind of colonial period, we're talking about someone, Haile Selassie, who they was part Ethiopia being the only African country that's still never colonized to this day. Ethiopia being the only African nation at a point in time in the League of Nations, which was obviously now we know as the United Nations. But he was really a spokesman and, you know, as the father of African unity for the continent. And a lot of time, if leaders wanted diplomats to want to meet up, they met up Haile Selassie because they saw him as like the kind of figurehead for Africa. So he made a lot of contributions, not only for his own country, Ethiopia, but also for Africa as whole. And you also have the Italian and Ethiopia invasion as well, where Ethiopia triumphed over Italy as well. In between 1935 and 1941. So these are just some of the achievements of Haile Selassie and some of the significance of him in terms of the works of the man himself. And there's a chapter in my book where it talks about the life, the legacy of Haile Selassie.
It's funny you mentioned that, because Haile Selassie, His Imperial Majesty now is like one of the most controversial figure I can think of in history, right? Across the world, you can see anybody dealing with black liberation tend to look up to His Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie as one of the key figure. But then you think about just Ethiopia. Think about Ethiopia for a while and not go international. It kind of becomes a more tricky situation, because if I talk to 5 Ethiopian, we might see 2 or 3 out of them that said total opposite of what everybody else would be saying. So if you feel like you can elaborate on that, how is that so that Haile Selassie can be such a great key figure across the world, but yeah, when it comes to internally as Ethiopia only, we find that there's so much different interpretation of the works that he did.
Yeah, yes, Bridget, I've heard of this myself, and I've spoken to several Ethiopians, yeah, some born in Ethiopia, some born here, some when I was living in Gambia, and other people that I've spoken to Ethiopians. And you're kind of right. If you speak to maybe, say, 5 people, well, maybe 3 or 4 of them will say good things about Haile Selassie, maybe 1 or 2 might not, or depending on how many you speak to, you'll get the pro and the cons, if you will. For example, some people will praise his works, and some people won't. I think that's true of, if you look at most leaders in whatever African country, whether you're talking about, the same could be said for Robert Mugabe in Zimbabwe, the same could be said a lot for Nelson Mandela, the same could be said for Thomas Sankara, Kwame Nkrumah, a lot of African leaders in general. If you actually go to the country and speak about the native people, what they think of a lot of the leaders, that will happen. I think sometimes, I don't want to say sometimes you can take for granted, like, for example, and I think people always basically want more in a country, even though when you look at in hindsight, what Haile Selassie did in bringing the country from like a kind of ancient age into modernizing it into a more recent age. And he was almost like the victim of his own works, because whilst he's developing like education and university and bringing education, as like the students and people become more and more developed, some of these people that rebelled against him because they wanted things to almost move faster. So there was always a complaint that yes, he was developing the country, but he wasn't developing it as fast enough. There's the question, there's a talk that people, as certain leaders get older, they should step down. But in a way, he was victim of his own work. There's some particular tribes, like the Ruma tribes, because Haile Selassie was the Amhara tribe, for example. Some of those may not speak too kindly of him. But I think, like, again, in African politics, you'll have like people that are in different tribes that are. We need to understand the context of Africa. It's very tribal, so people kind of tend to stick to their kind of tribes, etc. But I think there's a lot of dynamics in that. Hence why you get the, or if you speak to Ethiopian, depending on maybe what tribe or depending on what, like the how they view Haile Selassie, depending on, you know, it could be their class or different things, for example. But I've heard, different responses from Haile Selassie, depending on who you speak to, is completely correct.
Well, let me hear you say mountain.